Jason Statham hadn't set foot in his old school in decades. Fame, fortune, and a life filled with action had taken him far from these dusty hallways. But today, something had pulled him back. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was fate. He walked through the dimly lit corridors, his heavy footsteps echoing off the walls. The faint scent of old books and industrial cleaning solution filled the air. He smirked to himself, some things never changed. And then, he saw him. Bent over with a mop in his hands, the man worked with slow, deliberate movements, as if time had no hold on him. The same frail figure, the same tired but kind eyes. Jason's chest tightened. Mr. Hudson. The old janitor hadn't changed, only aged. Jason took a step forward, his voice rough from years of grit and action. Mr. Hudson. The janitor turned slowly, his eyes squinting in confusion before recognition dawned on his face. A small, weary smile appeared. Jason Statham. Well, I'll be damned. Jason wasn't smiling. His fists clenched as he took in the sight before him. Still working here? Jason asked, his voice sharper than intended. Mr. Hudson simply nodded. Gotta keep busy. Jason stared at him, a storm brewing inside. This wasn't right. A man who had dedicated his life to this school shouldn't still be here at 78, scrubbing floors. Not after all these years. Jason's jaw tightened. Something had to be done. And he was going to be the one to do it. Jason Statham had been in plenty of fights, on the screen and in real life. He'd faced villains, assassins, and men twice his size, but this? This was different. This was personal. He sat in his car outside the school, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind was racing. Mr. Hudson was still working, still struggling. Jason leaned his head back and let out a slow breath. Memories hit him like a punch to the gut. He saw himself as a kid, angry, lost, always ready to throw a punch. Teachers didn't know what to do with him. His parents were too busy trying to survive. But Hudson? Hudson never judged. You're better than this, kid, Hudson had said one night after breaking up a fight in the hallway. Jason had blood on his knuckles, but Hudson didn't yell. He didn't lecture. He just looked him in the eyes and said, "You fight like hell. But one day, you gotta figure out what you're fighting for." Jason hadn't forgotten. And now, as he stared at that school, he realized exactly what he was fighting for. Mr. Hudson was not going to spend the rest of his life mopping floors. Not if Jason had anything to say about it. Jason marched through the front doors of his old school like he owned the place. Teachers whispered. Students stared. Even the receptionist gasped when she saw him. But he didn't care. He had one destination in mind. The principal's office. He shoved the door open without knocking. The man behind the desk, a balding, nervous-looking guy in his 50s, jumped. Mr. Statham?" Jason's voice was low, dangerous. "We need to talk." The principal gestured for him to sit, but Jason remained standing, towering over the desk. "How the hell is Mr. Hudson still working here?" The principal swallowed hard. Well, he never retired." Jason narrowed his eyes. "Why not?" A pause. The man shifted in his chair. "He said he needed the job." Jason clenched his jaw. "Needed? As in, financially?" The principal hesitated, then gave a small nod. Jason exhaled sharply, pacing the room. This wasn't right. "Mr. Hudson has been working here since before I was born," Jason said, voice rough with anger. "And you're telling me he still needs to be here?" The principal's gaze dropped to his desk. He knew Jason was right. Jason leaned in, placing both hands on the table. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. I want every piece of information you have on him. His salary. His benefits. His retirement plan, if you can even call it that. The principal fumbled with his keyboard. I don't know if I can just. Jason cut him off. You can. And you will. The man swallowed hard, then started typing. An hour later, Jason sat in the principal's office, staring at a folder thick with documents. What he saw made his blood boil. Mr. Hudson's pension. Gone. His health benefits. Cut years ago. His salary. Barely above minimum wage. Jason's hands clenched into fists. Hudson had given his life to this school, and this was how they repaid him. The principal coughed nervously. It's complicated. Jason looked up. No. It's theft. The principal paled. I don't control the funding. Jason stood, shoving the folder back at him. Who does? The man hesitated. Jason's stare hardened. Who does? Finally, the principal sighed. The district office. They handle all the retirements. But I doubt they'll do anything. Jason smirked coldly. Then I'll make them. Jason didn't go straight to the district office. Not yet. First, he went back to the one man who mattered. He found Mr. Hudson in the supply closet, stacking heavy boxes of cleaning solution. Jason winced. The old man's hands shook slightly as he worked, but he didn't stop. Jason stepped forward. We need to talk. Hudson barely looked up. No time for talking. Work to do. Jason folded his arms. Not anymore. Hudson sighed. Jason, I told you before. Jason held up a hand. No speeches. No stubborn pride. Just facts. He set the folder down. This is what they did to you. They stole from you. Hudson hesitated, then flipped open the file. His eyes scanned the pages. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Jason watched him closely. You knew, didn't you? Hudson let out a slow breath. Had a feeling. Jason shook his head. And you just took it? Hudson chuckled dryly. What else was I gonna do? Sue them. I'm an old janitor, Jason. Not a fighter. Jason leaned in. Yeah. Well, I am. Hudson met his gaze. And what exactly are you planning to do? Jason cracked his knuckles. Whatever it takes. Hudson sighed, rubbing his temples. Jason, you don't have to do this. Jason's voice was steady. Yeah. I do. The old man looked at him for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded. Jason turned to leave. He had a war to start. And when Jason Statham declared war, people lost. Jason found Mr. Hudson in the supply closet, stacking boxes of cleaning solution. The old man moved slow, but his hands were steady. We need to talk, Jason said, leaning against the doorway. Hudson didn't stop working. Talk and never paid the bills, kid. Jason exhaled sharply. Neither did breaking your back at 78. Hudson paused, setting the box down. His eyes met Jason's. I'm fine. Jason shook his head. No, you're not. And I'm not gonna let this go. The old janitor sighed. I appreciate it, Jason. But I don't need charity. Jason smirked. Good. Because I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a damn job. Hudson frowned. A job? Jason's grin widened. Yeah. Something better than this. You ever think about retirement? Hudson chuckled. Every day. But thinking don't pay rent. Jason's smirk faded. Then I'll make it happen. The old man gave him a skeptical look. And how exactly are you gonna do that? Jason cracked his knuckles. Don't worry. I've got a plan. And if Jason Statham had a plan, nothing was going to stop him. Jason had spent his entire life solving problems with his fists. In the ring. On the streets. In the movies. But this? This was a different kind of fight. This wasn't about breaking bones, it was about breaking a system. He sat in a dimly lit cafe, fingers drumming against the table, eyes locked on the thick file of documents in front of him. The numbers were brutal. Mr. Hudson had been cheated, plain and simple. Pension stolen. Benefits erased. Salary frozen for decades. Jason clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a damn crime. And if there was one thing Jason hated, it was watching a good man get screwed over. His phone vibrated. He glanced down. Let's meet. I have information. Jason smirked. Good. The first piece of his plan was falling into place. Jason's informant was an old-school journalist named Frankie Wells. She wasn't scared of much. She had exposed corrupt politicians, taken down corporate scams, and made a living out of making powerful people nervous. Now, she sat across from Jason in the back of a nearly empty diner, flipping through Mr. Hudson's financial records. Her eyes narrowed. Jesus. This is worse than I thought. Jason leaned forward. Tell me. She tapped the paper. Hudson's pension wasn't just lost. It was taken. The district office rerouted the funds, funneled them into their own executive bonuses. Jason's grip on his coffee mug tightened. How much? She slid him a printed spreadsheet. Over $4 million. Jason let out a low whistle. Frankie smirked. You gonna punch them all in the face? Jason chuckled darkly. Tempting. But I need something that sticks. Frankie leaned back. I can get you the proof you need. Emails, transfers, signatures. But if you go after them publicly, they're gonna fight back. Hard. Jason shrugged. Let them try. Frankie studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right, Statham. Let's burn these bastards down. The next morning, Jason parked outside Mr. Hudson's tiny apartment. It was a one-bedroom, the kind of place that told you everything you needed to know: cheap rent, bad insulation, and a landlord who didn't care. Hudson answered the door in his usual work clothes, a mop in one hand. You again. Jason smirked. Me again. Hudson sighed and stepped aside. Come in before my damn coffee gets cold. Jason entered and glanced around. A worn-out couch. A few old photos. No TV. Just a radio playing jazz in the corner. Hudson sat at the small kitchen table and poured 2 cups. All right, let's hear it. Jason set the file on the table. I know what they did to you. Hudson didn't blink. I figured as much. Jason leaned forward. And I know how to fix it. Hudson shook his head. Jason, I told you. Jason cut him off. You don't have a choice. Hudson's brow furrowed. Excuse me. Jason tapped the folder. This isn't about pride, old man. This is about justice. They stole from you. And I'm gonna make them pay. Hudson exhaled slowly. And how exactly do you plan on doing that? Jason grinned. Simple. We're gonna make a deal they can't refuse. Hudson stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. You're a stubborn bastard, you know that. Jason's grin widened. Damn right. Jason spent the next 2 days preparing. He gathered proof, emails, financial records, even an internal memo admitting they cut pensions. He called lawyers, the kind who loved taking down corrupt executives. He even spoke to a few former employees, people who had been silenced, but were ready to talk. And then, he made his move. The district office was a glass and steel monument to corporate greed. Jason walked in like he owned the place. The receptionist barely had time to react before he was already past security. By the time he reached the executive floor, 2 men in suits were following him. One of them reached for his arm. Jason didn't stop walking. "Touch me, and you'll be picking up your teeth for a week." The guy hesitated. Then backed off. Jason smirked and pushed open the boardroom doors. Inside, 7 executives sat around a polished oak table, drinking overpriced coffee and pretending they weren't criminals. Jason tossed the folder onto the table. "Let's talk." The CEO, a smug-looking guy with slicked-back hair, barely looked up. "And you are?" Jason grinned. "The guy who's about to ruin your day." The room went silent as Jason pulled out a document. "Inside this folder is everything," he said calmly. "Emails. Transfers. Fake pension reports." The CEO straightened in his seat. "This is a private meeting, mister." Jason cut him off. "Not anymore." He tapped his phone. "Say hi to Frankie Wells. She's listening. And recording." A pause. Then, chaos. One executive cursed. Another reached for his phone. The CEO's face turned white. Jason leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Here's how this goes," he said smoothly. "You're going to reinstate every stolen pension. Every cent including interest." Silence. Jason's smile faded. "Or I go public." The CEO cleared his throat. "That's not how business works." Jason smirked. "That's funny. Because this isn't business. This is justice." He leaned in. "So, do we have a deal?" An hour later, Jason walked out of the building, phone buzzing in his pocket. A message from Frankie. "They caved. Pensions restored. You did it, Statham." Jason allowed himself a small grin. He wasn't done yet. Now, it was time to tell Mr. Hudson. And something told him the old man was about to get the biggest surprise of his life. Jason started digging. He called up lawyers, accountants, anyone who could tell him why the hell a man like Mr. Hudson was still working. What he found made his blood boil. Pension. Gone. Health benefits. Stripped away. Savings. Barely enough to survive. Hudson had been screwed. Jason slammed his fist on the table. This wasn't just a bad situation. This was theft. Somebody had stolen Mr. Hudson's future. And Jason Statham wasn't about to let that slide. Jason Statham had been in fights before. He had faced men twice his size, dodged bullets in movies, and taken on villains with nothing but his fists. But this was different. This wasn't about throwing punches. This was about destroying a system that thrived on robbing good people. As he sat on the balcony of his hotel room, staring out at the city, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. A sense of purpose. This wasn't just about Mr. Hudson anymore. How many others had been screwed over by these corporate parasites? How many people had worked their entire lives only to end up with nothing? Jason exhaled slowly. He wasn't just fixing this for Hudson. He was fixing it for every damn person they had ever stolen from. His phone buzzed. A message from Frankie Wells. "Got the final files. This is bigger than we thought. They've stolen from over 200 retirees." Jason clenched his jaw. It was time to take this fight to the next level. Jason couldn't do this alone. If he was going to bring down an entire corrupt system, he needed people who knew how to fight, not with fists, but with power. His first call was to Frankie Wells, the journalist who had already helped him crack open the scandal. "I need you to go public. Now." Frankie hesitated. "You sure? Once this goes out, there's no going back." Jason smirked. "That's the point." His second call was to Leo Carter, an ex-corporate lawyer who had switched sides after seeing too much corruption. Leo picked up on the first ring. "Jason? What the hell do you need at 2 a.m.? Jason's voice was firm. "Justice." Leo sighed. "You're lucky I hate these bastards." His third call was to Mia Alvarez, a financial investigator who specialized in uncovering fraud. She laughed when she heard what Jason was up to. "Statham, you're insane. I love it. I'm in." And just like that, Jason had his team. For the next 3 days, they dug deep. Mia traced the stolen pensions through offshore accounts, fake shell companies, and hidden transactions. Leo crafted a legal strategy that would make it impossible for the district to worm their way out. And Frankie? She wrote a story so explosive that it would shake the entire city. Jason coordinated everything, pulling strings, making calls, and ensuring that when they pulled the trigger, there was no escape for the people responsible. Jason's plan wasn't just about exposing the corruption. It was about forcing them to pay. He arranged for a press conference outside the district office. Mia, Leo, and Frankie would be there. So would former employees, retirees, and every journalist in town. And most importantly, Mr. Hudson. Because when the truth came out, Jason wanted him front and center. This wasn't just a fight. This was a reckoning. The day of the press conference, the district executives were already in panic mode. Emails leaked. News reports exploded. Every major network was covering the scandal. Headline: City officials stole millions from retirees. Jason stood behind Frankie as she delivered the speech. "We have undeniable proof," she said into the microphones. "The people behind this theft are sitting in that office right now. And we are demanding answers." Cameras flashed. Reporters fired off questions. Then, Jason stepped forward. He didn't need a microphone. His voice was loud, clear, and full of fire. "You stole from the wrong people. And now, you're gonna pay it back." The district officials tried to fight back. They released a weak statement, claiming the reports were misleading. Jason laughed. Because he had one final move. He walked into the district office with Leo and Mia, live streaming everything. "I'm here to deliver a message," Jason said, stepping into the boardroom. The CEO glared at him. "You can't just walk in here." Jason slammed a stack of legal documents onto the table. "Oh, I can. And I just did." Leo stepped forward. "These are lawsuits. You're being sued by over 200 people. And with the evidence we have, you're going to lose." The CEO's face turned pale. This isn't legal." Jason leaned in. "Neither was what you did." The board members panicked. Mia smiled, holding up a USB drive. "This contains proof of every stolen dollar." Jason crossed his arms. "So, you can return every cent, or we can bury you." A long silence. Then, finally, the CEO sighed in defeat. "We'll return the money." Jason smirked. "Damn right, you will." The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Stolen pensions returned, district executives forced to pay back retirees. Jason sat with Mr. Hudson at a diner, watching the news on the small TV in the corner. The old man shook his head. "Can't believe you did it." Jason sipped his coffee. "Couldn't have done it without you." Hudson chuckled. All I did was mop floors. Jason smirked. And all I did was break a corrupt system. The old man smiled. Guess we both had a job to do. Jason nodded. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had done something that really mattered. Jason stormed into a corporate office, his presence like a wrecking ball. The executives barely had time to react before he dropped a folder on the desk. "Explain this," Jason growled. The man behind the desk, a smug suit with a fake smile, adjusted his tie. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Jason leaned in. "The guy who's about to make your life hell." He flipped open the folder. Inside was proof, years of financial abuse, cut benefits, and legal loopholes used to drain pensions. The suit paled. I'm sure we can work something out." Jason's eyes burned. "Damn right we can." 10 minutes later, the deal was done. Mr. Hudson was getting every cent back. Jason Statham wasn't a man who played games. He had spent weeks building his case, exposing the corruption, and forcing the people responsible into a corner. Now, it was time for the final showdown. The district executives thought they could walk away, that signing some paperwork and returning the stolen pensions would be enough. They were wrong. Because Jason didn't just want them to pay back the money. He wanted them to face the consequences. And he knew exactly how to make that happen. The day before the confrontation, Jason met with his team one last time. They gathered in a private room in the back of a small, unmarked bar, the kind of place where real business got done. Frankie Wells had her laptop open, scanning news headlines. Leo Carter was flipping through legal documents, looking for weak spots. Mia Alvarez leaned against the wall, arms crossed, tapping her fingers against her elbow. Jason stood at the head of the table, rolling his knuckles. "We've got them cornered," he said. "But I want more than their money. I want them exposed, humiliated, and destroyed." Leo sighed. "Jason, legally speaking, we've already won." Jason smirked. "Legally? Yeah. But I don't play by their rules." Frankie grinned. "All right, Statham. What's the plan?" Jason leaned in. And he told them. The district executives had planned to settle everything quietly. They had agreed to sign the paperwork, return the stolen pensions, and disappear. They thought that was the end of it. But when they arrived at the high-rise corporate office, they found something unexpected. Jason Statham. Waiting for them. Along with an army of journalists, camera crews, and a crowd of angry retirees. The executives froze. Jason smirked and stepped forward. Change of plans. The CEO, a slick-looking man named Richard Vaughn, swallowed hard. "Mr. Statham, this is unnecessary. We're handling the issue internally." Jason cut him off. "The only thing you're handling is your downfall." Jason grabbed the microphone from a nearby reporter and turned to the crowd. These men thought they could steal from the people who built this city. From men and women who spent their lives working, only to be left with nothing. The crowd roared in agreement. Jason turned back to Vaughn. "You don't get to walk away. You don't get to hide behind lawyers. You're going to admit what you did, on camera. Right now." Vaughn's face turned pale. I can't." Jason stepped closer. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "If you don't, I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life behind bars." Silence. Then, Vaughn cracked. On live television, he admitted everything. The stolen funds. The fraud. The bribery. And the moment he finished, the police arrived. Jason had made sure that the right people were watching. Law enforcement. Government officials. People who couldn't ignore this anymore. So when Vaughn and his team confessed, the cops didn't hesitate. The moment the words left his mouth, two uniformed officers stepped forward. "Richard Vaughn, you are under arrest." The CEO's eyes widened. "Wait, no. I." Click. The sound of handcuffs snapping shut was the most satisfying thing Jason had heard in a long time. As the other executives were rounded up, Jason turned to Mr. Hudson. The old man watched everything in shock. Jason smirked. "Told you they'd pay." Hudson exhaled slowly. "You really don't do things halfway, do you?" Jason laughed. "Not my style." The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Corrupt executives arrested after Statham LED investigation. Jason Statham takes down pension scandal in explosive live showdown. Justice served, millions returned to retirees. Jason didn't need to read them. He already knew. It was over. And they had won. Later that night, Jason sat in a small beachside bar with Mr. Hudson. The old man had a beer in his hand and a smile on his face. Jason leaned back, watching the waves roll in. Hudson took a sip and shook his head. "Never thought I'd see the day." Jason smirked. "Neither did they." Hudson looked at him. "Why'd you do it, Jason? Why go this far?" Jason didn't answer right away. Then, he exhaled and said, "Because when I was a kid, you told me I had to figure out what I was fighting for." Hudson's eyes softened. Jason raised his glass. "Now I know." And for the first time in years, Mr. Hudson laughed. Because they both knew, this was just the beginning. Jason picked up Mr. Hudson the next morning. "We're going for a drive." Hudson sighed. "I got work to do." Jason grinned. "Not anymore." He tossed a folder on the dashboard. Hudson opened it, and froze. His pension. His benefits. A lifetime of security. His hands shook. "How?" Jason started the car. "I made a few calls." Hudson swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say." Jason glanced at him. "Say you're ready to live." For the first time in a long time, Hudson smiled. Jason Statham had spent weeks tearing down a corrupt empire. Now, with Vaughn and his cronies behind bars and the stolen pensions restored, most people would call it a victory. But Jason wasn't most people. He knew that winning a fight wasn't the same as winning the war. Mr. Hudson had his money back. But money wasn't the problem. The problem was that for 50 years, the only thing Hudson had known was work. And now? Now he had to figure out what it meant to live. Jason wasn't about to let him do it alone. Jason found Mr. Hudson right where he always was, at the school, sitting in the empty hallway, staring at the freshly mopped floor. The old man didn't need to be there anymore. But habits were hard to break. Jason dropped a set of keys on the floor beside him. Hudson glanced down, then up at Jason. "What's this?" Jason smirked. "A problem." Hudson frowned. "What kind of problem?" Jason crossed his arms. "A house. By the beach. With your name on it." Silence. Hudson blinked. "What?" Jason nodded toward the keys. "I bought you a place. A real one. Not some tiny apartment with a busted heater." Hudson's jaw tightened. "I can't accept that." Jason sat down beside him. "Yeah, you can. And you will." The old man sighed. "Jason, you've done enough." Jason cut him off. "You spent your whole life cleaning up after other people. It's time someone did something for you." Hudson swallowed hard, staring at the keys. For the first time in decades, he had something he never thought he'd have. A home. A real one. Jason wasn't taking no for an answer. So the next morning, he picked Hudson up in his car and started driving. "Where the hell are we going?" Hudson grumbled. Jason smirked. "You'll see." Hudson huffed. "You and your damn surprises." Jason turned up the radio. He wasn't going to explain it. He was going to show him. Hours later, they pulled up to a 2-story house with a view of the ocean. Hudson sat in the car, staring at it. Jason watched him carefully. "Say something." Hudson exhaled. "I don't deserve this." Jason's expression hardened. "You deserve more." Hudson chuckled. "You're a stubborn bastard." Jason smirked. "And you're a retired stubborn bastard." Hudson turned back to the house. It wasn't just a building. It was a fresh start. After a long pause, he reached for the keys. Jason watched as he walked up the steps, hesitated, then slowly opened the door. For the first time in years, Mr. Hudson stepped into a home that was his. Retirement wasn't easy. For 50 years, Hudson had been on a schedule. Wake up. Work. Go home. Repeat. Now he had to figure out what the hell to do with free time. Jason checked in on him constantly. One afternoon, he found Hudson sitting on the porch, staring at the ocean. "You bored yet?" Jason asked, dropping into the chair beside him. Hudson snorted. "Damn right." Jason chuckled. "Thought so." Hudson took a sip of his beer. "What the hell am I supposed to do now?" Jason shrugged. "Live." The old man scoffed. "And what does that mean?" Jason leaned back. "You ever travel?" Hudson shook his head. "Didn't have time." Jason smirked. "Well, now you do." Hudson raised an eyebrow. "You saying I should go on vacation?" Jason grinned. "I'm saying you should see the world." Hudson was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Maybe Jason was right. Maybe it was time to live. A week later, Jason handed Hudson an envelope. Hudson frowned. "What's this?" Jason grinned. "A one-way ticket." Hudson opened it. A first-class ticket to anywhere he wanted to go. The old man stared at it. "Jason, Jason held up a hand. "No arguments. No excuses. Just go." Hudson exhaled. "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" Jason smirked. "Not my style." The old man chuckled. And for the first time in a long time, he felt excited. A few days later, Jason dropped Hudson off at the airport. The old man had a backpack, a plane ticket, and a new life waiting for him. As they stood at the gate, Hudson turned to Jason. "I don't know how to thank you." Jason smirked. "Then don't." Hudson exhaled, looking at the ticket. "You sure you don't want to come?" Jason chuckled. "I've had my adventures. Now it's your turn." Hudson nodded. "You're a good man, Jason." Jason grinned. "Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation to keep." Hudson laughed. Then, with one last nod, he walked through the gate. And just like that, he was free. Jason stood by the window, watching Hudson's plane take off. He felt something strange, satisfaction. Not the kind that came from a fight. Not the kind that came from winning. But the kind that came from doing the right thing. Mr. Hudson wasn't a janitor anymore. He wasn't a forgotten man. He was alive. And Jason? Jason knew one thing for sure. Some fights are worth every damn punch. Jason had one last trick up his sleeve. After a long drive, they pulled up to a house, a quiet place near the beach, the kind of home you retire in. Hudson stared at it. "What's this?" Jason tossed him the keys. Yours. Hudson blinked. You're kidding. Jason smirked. You think I joke about this stuff? The old man's eyes welled up. Jason, I can't. Jason cut him off. Yeah, you can. For years, Hudson had given everything to the people around him. It was time for someone to give back. Jason Statham wasn't sentimental. But as he sat alone at the airport bar, watching the screen announce Hudson's flight to Paris, he felt something unusual. Not sadness. Not regret. Something else. Satisfaction. The old man had earned this. Jason took a slow sip of his whiskey. He had done a lot of things in his life, fought, traveled, made movies, taken down corrupt executives. But this? This felt like his biggest victory yet. His phone buzzed. A message from Frankie Wells. Something you need to see. Come to the diner. Jason exhaled. He thought this was over. But something told him it wasn't. He tossed a few bills on the counter, grabbed his jacket, and walked out. Frankie was already at the booth, laptop open, coffee untouched. Jason slid in across from her. This better be good. She turned the screen toward him. What he saw made his blood go cold. A secret fund. A hidden account. Millions of dollars, more than what they had already exposed. Jason's jaw clenched. Vaughn and his crew weren't just stealing pensions, Frankie said. They were laundering money. And there are bigger names involved. Jason leaned back, rubbing his jaw. He had thought this was the end. But now, he realized something. The real fight was just beginning. Jason grabbed his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. A deep, gruff voice answered. Didn't think I'd hear from you again, Statham. Jason smirked. I need some help. The kind that gets messy. A pause. Then, the voice chuckled. Where do we start? Jason's grin widened. Right where we left off. Months later, Jason sat on the same beach where he had left Hudson's new home. His phone buzzed. A photo. Mr. Hudson. Standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. Smiling. A simple message followed. I finally figured out what I'm fighting for. Thanks, kid. Jason smirked. That was all he needed to hear. Jason finished his drink and stood up. He had done his part. But there was still work to do. He pulled on his jacket, walked toward the street, and disappeared into the city. Because some fights, they never really end. And Jason Statham? He was just getting started.